Welcome to the Social Recruiting Show. We are missing my co-host today, Mrs. Katrina Collier, because she is out sick, but she will be back definitely next week, and we're definitely missing her and wishing her well. But thankfully, Glenn Martin, our good friend, was able to step in last minute. So thank you so much for that, Glenn.
My pleasure.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to chatting with you, but also our guest. This is Matt Alder from MetaShift, but a lot of people also know him from his book, which we're going to get into, or his podcast, which has been a long-running podcast I've listened to for years. And I was not surprised at all this morning when I was checking out the stats, and it's over 160 episodes, I think, maybe possibly even more, but it's definitely been going from everything from massive, leaders in the business and these major brands to people kind of doing the work. So every type of topic, I highly recommend the Recruiting Future. But I've been a fan for a long time, so it's very nice to have you on the show, Matt. Welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Absolute pleasure, and absolute pleasure to be here.
Oh, someone's saying no audio. Hopefully it's working. Stephen, do you have audio? Let us know. All right, so let's start. I guess just a little bit about you. I mean, I know a lot about you because we've been friends and connected, and I'm so grateful I got to be on your podcast. But just a little more about MetaShift and what you're up to.
Yeah, sure. So I mainly work as a consultant. I sort of work with employers on talent acquisition innovation. So a lot of that's about technology and various aspects of recruitment marketing. My background's in recruitment marketing, so I spent 10 years working in the recruitment for various sort of recruitment marketing agencies, helping lots of employers find and persuade talent to work for them. So consulting is my main gig. As you mentioned, I also run the Recruiting Future podcast, which increasingly takes up more and more of my time, and I'm planning on putting even more time and effort into it this year. And it's going to be 4 years old in February, basically. I actually had to look up when I started it because I couldn't remember, but it was February 4 years ago. I also do a lot of research and a lot of writing. So as you mentioned, I had a book published year before last, which I co-authored with my very good friend Mervyn Dinnan. And we're currently writing our second book.
I didn't know that.
Writing it. I was
Cool.
I've cut off from the writing process to come and talk on the show. So should we manage to finish it, that'll be out in September, mid-September this year.
Any sneak peek as like the title or the topic similar as exceptional talent, similar to that, or whole new recruitment marketing? What can you share?
Similar, but perhaps something that is very relevant for our times. It's about digital transformation, and it's about the talent aspect of digital transformation. So we'll talk about it more as the year sort of as the year progresses. But basically, it's looking at what companies need to do to have the right skills in their business, whether that's people or automation or whatever that might be, to deal with the challenges of digital transformation that pretty much every business is facing at the moment.
Mm-hmm. They're facing it or they're struggling big time if they're not trying to, right?
Absolutely.
Same with social media. I think a lot of businesses sort of didn't allow employees on it or didn't, kind of ignored it. And now they're like, wait a minute, we need to really embrace this, right?
Absolutely.
So where should we start? We were talking about content marketing, which is something I love to talk about. That's what we talked about mostly, I think, on our podcast.
Yeah.
And I think the kind of thing is where do people start? Everyone's like, you need a strategy. Where do you think people should start?
I think it's kind of really interesting because I obviously talk to a huge amount of employers about recruitment marketing as part of the podcast, and I sort of directly work with 4 or 5 on initiatives, hands-on initiatives like this at the moment. And when you sort of talk about social media, everyone is always talking about content. So when you talk to people about content, most people understand that they need sort of some kind of content to sit on their website or to sit on their social media channels to engage with their audience. But very often the understanding doesn't go much beyond that. And what I'm really interested in, and what I've sort of done a lot of writing about and talking about in the last 6 months, and I'm planning to do more of that this year, is really content marketing and how that works in a recruitment perspective. And there are there's a few organisations who kind of get aspects of this, but I'm not really seeing employers take full advantage of it in the same way that it's being used for marketing in other sectors, basically. So it's kind of a real sort of passion of mine at the moment to sort of help people, take full advantage of the tools and techniques that are available, and actually, first of all, think about how they produce the right types of content, but then think about actually how you do that in a strategic way to help you sort of achieve your talent acquisition objectives.
I see a lot of companies where it's like, we need a Facebook careers page. Let's do it. And I'm like, maybe you don't. Like, why do you need one? Yeah, what are you going to do with it? What are you going to post? Who's going to see it? Instead of just jumping in. And it's nice to have social media for sure, but I think it's like you said, figuring out why you really need it, how you're going to make the most of it, right?
Yeah, and I think I think there's two parts to it as well. I think there's understanding the whole aspect of storytelling and business storytelling, and actually what is the purpose of all this content. It's to create connections, it's to resonate, with the right target audiences and make them take action. And lots of things I think we can sort of talk around in terms of that storytelling aspect. And then there's the marketing part of it. It's like, well, actually, you're doing great storytelling, but why are you doing it? And how do you then convert whatever resonance or interest that storytelling has created, into an action, whatever that action might be, a registration, an application, a conversation, whatever's appropriate for that particular objective, basically. So I think it's those two parts to it. It's that storytelling part and doing that brilliantly, but then converting that into actual into something tangible. Yeah,
it's nice that it's on your career page, but also maybe are the right people seeing it? A lot of people aren't going to your career page, so how do you get those people that should be seeing it, and maybe those people that should be seeing something else to see something else? It's definitely tricky, and I think that's why it helps to have a marketer on a recruitment team, which is still pretty rare. But I'm seeing a little more and more of it, and I think I'm a massive fan of it because they get audiences, they get personas and all this stuff. Do you do personas with clients?
Yeah, I think it's I think it's a really useful tool to have. It's something it's something that I kind of recommend. But I think that sometimes people even get too caught up in personas, and I think it's actually let's get right back to the basics here. And the question is, who is your target audience? Who are you actually trying to reach? And you can express that in a much simpler way than creating sort of different personas. But it's actually sort of, I suppose, more important to think about, well, where are they? How do we reach these people? How do we get content? How do we get content to them? And what reaction is it that we're looking for from that, from that content? And I think that's interesting as well, because that can also be, a negative reaction. And I've seen some great content out there about, what it's like to do a certain job that's designed to put lots of people off. Whether that job is, working in a shop at an airport where you have to start at 4 a.m. or something, and showing that aspect of it and the benefits of it, but at the same time, I think properly targeted content, properly thought through content should also, not speak to the audience of people that you don't want to apply. So I think there's lots of aspects to it.
Yeah, we've been working really hard this year on getting quality applies, because we don't want to just dump tons of applies to our recruiters who are going to be like, oh, now I have to sort through 300-400 people. So that's why I've been working really hard with, and luckily I have some great tools, and not everyone has those, but to be able to track what's actually getting to the hiring managers, and obviously hires is even better, but I think that's tricky. But the tools is tough, right? I mean, if you don't have, what if you have an ATS that's self-select, source of hire, and you have like, you can't track, you can't build landing pages. That's, I think, a challenge for so many companies.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is a big technology aspect to this. I researched and wrote a white paper last year on the future of career sites, and one of the things that I sort of really flagged up in that was how neglected career sites are. Even in the conversations that we have. So you look at all of the chat around our industry, and it's always about applicant tracking systems and AI and chatbots and the best, this, that, and the other. And the humble career site kind of just sort of gets overlooked as something that is a necessary evil, or sits there in between. And really its job is to convince and convert the right audience, and to do that, you have to have the right tools available, within the capabilities of your career site, whether that's landing pages or a great content management system, the ability to personalize content, and also the ability to make it really easy for people to take action, action when they've, when they're kind of interested. And I think that is where lots of career sites fall down, and perhaps rely too much on the front part of the ATS to actually do things like deliver job content, provide an application process that has been created to make the recruitment process more easy for the company, not to enhance recruitment marketing or make it easier for the individual. So I think we're talking about content, but the platforms that you deliver those content and convert that interest is absolutely critical. And I think that's a massive issue for lots of people, whether that's a small company or a large company, and it's not something that I think we talk about enough.
Can I say on the flip side, though, sometimes I see companies that spend $1 million on this massive career site upgrade, and they have crappy job descriptions that are so painful. And then the job seekers are often, not always, but coming, from Indeed, from Google, straight to the job description. Yeah. So I think there's a balance. I think
that when you look at content in recruitment, the biggest set of content that any company or agency has the way it describes its jobs. Those huge millions and millions of words of content of describing jobs. So, and again, this is a struggle that lots of my clients have. They'll work through some great content, in various aspects of their recruitment marketing, but they've still got thousands and thousands of poorly written job descriptions masquerading as job adverts that kind of let it all down. And again, that's another. That's another challenge, and for a smaller company that might be easier. For larger companies, you're talking about huge volumes and reworking processes and things like that. But it's that's a big win. Having brilliantly written job adverts, job postings, whatever you want to call them, is probably going to get you a lot more traction than spending a huge amount on a lovely video that some people might not watch, that some people might not even watch.
So are there some kind of guiding principles, Matt? So for companies that are effectively at the very beginning, and to yourself as well, Audra, because I know this is an area that you're very advanced in. So if you're dealing with a company that's at that very early stages of thinking about kind of recruitment marketing, are there 1, 2, or 3 kind of guiding principles or starting points that you would advocate them utilizing or thinking about when they start down that particular journey?
Yeah, so I always use a really, and this is kind of in my book, if anyone's seen me do a presentation at any point in the last 2 years, this is always in my presentation. So, apologies for the repetition, but I think it's still very relevant. I always get people to work through a really, really simple, flow chart. I mean, it's not even a model; it's just a kind of flow chart. It's, it's about, how do you get the attention of the right people? So attention. How do you then persuade those people that this is or isn't the company and the opportunity for them? I'll talk about that again in a second. So the persuasion part of it, how do you then convert that into an application, a registration, a conversation, whatever that might be? And how do you give a brilliant experience all the way through that? And how do you measure it? So I'll kind of always start, whether it's a large company or a small company, with that really simple model. And what I find is that people are neglecting some point of it. They're not really thinking about how they get the attention of their audience, or they're brilliant at getting the attention of the right audience, but they're terrible at actually telling them why they're a great place to, why they're a great place to work. Yeah. Or they're brilliant at doing that, but they lose the interest because everyone goes into an impenetrable online application system that you have to register a 15 character for before you can.
Mother's maiden name. I've seen that.
Mentioning no names of any systems, or they just give a terrible experience. So I think it's simple, but it's complicated to follow. And I don't think there's much science to this. I did a bit of work for someone the back end of last year, and I looked at I think I looked at about 20 homepages of big tech company career sites.
They're all the same, right?
It was interesting because there were, I haven't got it in front of me, but I think I found there were 15 key characteristics that were common across all of them. Not one site had all of them, but everyone had different combinations of them. When you looked at it, there was no real rhyme and reason as to why. There was no real strategy as to. There were 15 things that I thought were great and were really important and all worked, but there was no real rhyme or reason why some people had them and some people didn't, and that's where I think we're sort of missing out on the science of all of this. But yeah, I suppose back to that persuasion part, it's not just about persuading people that you're the company they want to work for. It's about the opportunity as well, the specific job, the career opportunity, whatever it is. And I don't think people break down that. That persuasion piece enough, basically. So that's a really long answer to your, is there a really simple way?
It's really interesting because you pick up on the point. You pick up on the point of the why. A lot of companies miss the point of why are we doing this and why would it mean something to somebody externally, when we put in content out. So I think that's a really, really valuable thing. Debbie on the chat channel did ask though, she was like, okay, if we're starting out, what's the value in terms of keeping the content marketing creation in-house as opposed to outsourcing it? And I know this is something you feel strongly about, Audra. So it'd be really interesting to get both of your kind of opinion on that, in-house versus outsourced. Which one do you think has the most value and why?
Well, you go first, Matt, but I've got an answer.
You can go first. I went first.
I think it really depends on what types of projects. I think there could be value for both, but I definitely am a fan of having, if you can afford it, having a marketing or recruitment marketing person on the team. If you can afford that, if it makes sense for your company, I think it's great because they can understand the culture, the people. They're there if like something happens, something cool. All of a sudden, this cool thing happens. They can run over, take pictures, and so I do definitely think that's important. But there are certain projects where I think it could be really healthy to outsource. One good example I think is. Having some help with your EVP, employee value proposition. It's good to have some external feedback because you're kind of in there and you might be wrong. You might be thinking these are our cultures, this is our pieces, and you could do your own research for sure. But I think it's sometimes a good idea to have some external research on that. And there's just a lot of different projects where I think it could be good, but I think it depends on the project for sure.
Cool.
Yeah. So I suppose I'm coming at this from. Being an external consultant and
exactly.
10 years working in ad agencies. But actually, I very much agree with Audra. I think there is a temptation to want to outsource all of this. I do a lot of awards judging, and I see some amazing creative, content things that the companies have done that are groundbreaking and do all this kind of stuff. But I also see things that, frankly, were probably a massive waste of money because they can't say whether they were effective or not. And I'm not quite sure sometimes why people made why people would have made the investment. But I think there is a lot to be gained from using external partners when that's appropriate. But more than that, I think that with the world that we live in now, you really need to have a sort of a base level of content that's going on all the time that talks about the company, the life of the company. Well, I'm such a big fan of the stuff that Audra does. It's kind of stuff that's there constantly, and I'm not sure you can outsource that. I think you need to have someone there who's documenting that and curating the stories and finding them and bringing them out. So I think that having some aspect of this done internally is absolutely absolutely critical, because you can't do this as a series of one-off campaigns and things like that. So having that sort of base level of content that is created in some way internally, I think is really useful. I think is essential, not really useful. And there's a couple of aspects. I think sometimes people get really caught up about the quality of stuff. So, we need top quality video or top quality audio, or whatever that might be. And that's not always important. What is important, though, is I think that there needs to be a strategy behind it. So understanding what story you're actually telling, and perhaps researching and understanding how storytelling in content can actually work, are probably critical skills that you may need to invest for some help in or train people up in. But I think it's probably a mix of internal and external. But I think having someone producing content internally is a critical part of it.
Definitely agree with the quality piece. Some of our best things that resonated the most and had the most hits were videos that my intern made, and they were fantastic and cost the price of the intern, but zero cost. And I think that resonates more because it's not so much a commercial; it's more an actual interesting story versus this big, obviously brand commercial. I think that turns people off these days. It used to be okay, but I think now more and more we're like, oh, I don't want to see all that. Sorry,
I'm smiling because my eyes just went to the right hand of the screen. I caught Jim.
It's going by fast. It's hard to keep
talking about Doctor Who. So
definitely going by fast. If we're missing questions, just copy and paste them for us, so we can definitely ask Matt or Glenn. Sure.
Someone did ask about what I found interesting about career sites, and as I say, I don't have my amazing 15-point matrix in front of me, but I think the biggest single thing that all of the, and I do a huge amount of career site audits and benchmarks and all that kind of stuff, and I think the single biggest thing that career sites that are more successful than others have is the ability to create emotional engagement with a target audience. Mm-hmm. So many career sites just talk about the company and we do this and we do this. It's our mission to change the world of widgets or whatever it is, and I think the best ones actually create an emotional connection with the audience by talking about the audience and their hopes and fears for their careers, and how they could achieve that within the organization. And that's so different from sort of having a corporate mission statement on that homepage and talking about your products and things like that. So it's I think if you look at some of the the sort of big tech companies, that's something they all do, which is create this, this sense of emotional engagement with the audience right from the homepage.
I definitely think emotion is key, and also just value that doesn't necessarily have to be about your company. Another thing that went well for us was we went to Grace Hopper and we did a video beforehand about tips for your first time at Grace Hopper. So it wasn't about our company. Of course, at the end, we had a logo and maybe a little link, but it was just honestly valuable to people going to the event. So I think that's something we could do more of too in recruitment. Not us, but what does our audience really need? What problems can we solve? I don't think we think about that necessarily enough.
Absolutely.
And I think both of you guys touched upon this in when you were on Matt's podcast, which was around the sort of personalization element of kind of content creation. And, kind of interested to get your thoughts around what that means. I mean, contextually, what is personalization in the context of content marketing? Is it one-to-ones or is it one-to-many? And how do you kind of almost control that so it feels kind of personal and it feels kind of direct message?
Do you want to jump in or me, Matt? I don't mind.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I think that we're at the start of the rise of chatbots, and the promise of artificially intelligent conversations that will know more about me than I know myself. And I think that's really interesting. And I think there is some interesting bits of work being done in that sphere. I've got some podcast content coming up on that soon to try and really dig in and understand what may or may not be happening. But actually, I think we should take a step back from that. Personalization in this context, very often it's about helping people find the right job on the career site or whatever it is that's relevant to them, and having a kind of an effective way of navigating your content so people can actually find what they're looking for would be a good step. Moving forward from I'm seeing lots of companies start to tailor the content on their career sites to the type of job searches that people are doing. So if they're looking for a specific role, it's about showing other roles, but also showing content on the career site that might be appropriate to them. And there's a few companies out there who are who are achieving that. People like Atkins and Vodafone, and various others who have some really sort of cool career site technology that does that. So, like with anything, I think it's very easy to get caught up in the the latest emerging tech and the cool things to do, and then you take a step back and say, well, actually, we're not serving our audiences very well because we're making it impossible for them to find the information that they're actually looking for, let alone trying to intelligently suggest to them what they want. So I think that's a key point that we shouldn't lose sight of.
Yep. I definitely want to get to, I think Jim had a question, but I'll just briefly say we're very lucky to have a tool called Clinch, so that every job description is based on some sort of template. So I've created like one for UK sales, one for Dublin R&D, and as you go. And each one has a different video or picture. And so I try and do exactly what you're saying, Matt, so that someone comes there, they can relate to that versus like generic stuff that's not exciting. They can say, okay, this is what it's like in this department or this location. And all of our content, we try and do that. We have a hiring plan. We're so lucky for the whole year that's mapped out. So we can say, okay, in Q2, we need these people. Then we can create our content based on that. But I think we're very lucky. I don't know if a lot of companies have that, but I think that allows us to do this, really targeted content. And I think it's definitely key to, talking specifically to the people that you want to apply.
Yeah, I did a really interesting, interesting conversation with the recruiters over at HubSpot on my podcast a few weeks back, and they do that on a kind of dynamic basis. They look all the time where the kind of blockages are in their recruitment funnel. So, are we getting enough salespeople through in this particular area, in this particular, territory? Is everyone dropping out at second interview stage? Are people not accepting offers? And they actually create content based on solving those particular problems with their recruitment funnel, which I suppose is kind of a step further from where you guys are. I think I was the only company I've come across that do that. Unsurprising, considering the software they sell. It's obviously, it's part of their corporate DNA, as it were. But I thought that's fascinating. A kind of a real sort of advanced use of content to actually, solve recruitment problems they've got in real time. How can we sort of put this out there to better educate people as to our employee value proposition or recruitment process or benefits or particular city or whatever that might be. So that's fascinating.
Yep, they've always been ahead of game. I've been kind of watching what they've been doing since they were doing Facebook Lives back in 2015.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think they said it's interesting. They've taken a lot of the content kind of away from their site towards Facebook Live because they sort of discovered that actually that's where the majority of their audience kind of was and hung around, which is, again, interesting. And also says a lot about audiences as well, because I think sometimes people will see a company doing something like that and say, right, we need to do exactly the same thing, but they might have a very different audience, a very, very different context, and it doesn't work, and they kind of abandon the whole thing. So again, understand, I think they're kind of winning there because they also really understand their audience.
Yeah,
totally. So Jim asked on the chat channel, when creating your content, do you take trending topics into account, and obviously trending topics that relate or can relate to your brand? Is that sort of advice you pass on to sort of clients, Matt?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I think it was 2 days ago, Twitter's business, Twitter for Business, which you can kind of register for on Twitter, which is their sort of the bit that sells adverts, that you can, or the bit you can buy adverts from, sent me a 365-day Twitter event calendar for 2019, tailored to the UK, which had every single hashtag brand, hashtag bandwagon you could jump on.
Wow.
Okay, and even on the most popular ones, it even said how many tweets were kind of appearing. So it's obviously, and that's a big thing in content marketing, to kind of align your content with those trending topics. But I can just, it just gets done really badly most of the time. I had a client who will remain nameless. He was doing some of that to, sort of promote some of the. There were sort of a couple of International Day of the X that they were sort of jumping on the bandwagon of, and it just kind of, they disappeared in a whole crowd of other people doing the same thing, and they didn't do it quite as well as some of the big consumer brands were doing it. And it just didn't feel that it was quite right. But I think that they're trending topics to your organization and kind of understanding that. I think I definitely think there's something in that, and it's something to think about, something useful. I just wouldn't take it as far as downloading the Twitter for Business calendar and tweeting out on every available national sausage roll day, whatever it was yesterday. So I think having timely, relevant topic content, definitely. Jumping on bandwagons for the sake of it, definitely not.
I mean, how valuable is that content if every single company puts out a tweet that says Happy New Year, and every single company does it? Exactly. And because it's trending, it disappears in about 4 seconds.
Yeah, it's interesting. So kind of in December, I counted, I got about 20 emails in December from tech vendors who were putting out predictions for recruitment tech vendors who are putting out predictions for 2019. This is what people are saying is going to happen. And it's like, I got 20 requests for my thoughts. And how are any of those things going to stand out? Now, obviously, it's a different audience. They're looking at sort of recruitment tech buyers rather than people looking for a job. But the principle's the same. It's like, how are any of those going to stand out? Particularly, when they're all asking the same people for the same views, and they're all going to be published probably on Monday. It's not really. It doesn't really cut through. And I think it's that. How do you cut through? How do you stand out and resonate with people? That's where this really comes down to. And I think there's so much, copycat, bandwagon jumping, they've done this, we'll do it stuff going on. In marketing in general at the moment, I think that it's about taking a step back and saying, what can we do that's going to really stand out? And very often that's doing something completely different to all your competitors.
On that point, so, kind of thinking on, because what you're talking about there is some sort of almost like free kind of content that people can kind of jump on the bandwagon. When you're thinking about organic versus paid sort of content, what sort of balance would you look at? Certainly, and I'm putting this back into the context of a kind of almost like a recruitment marketing team that's starting out, because that's going to be a consideration. It's like, how much money do we put towards this? How much do we try and generate as organic sort of content? What would be your kind of advice around that?
It depends. I think it depends.
General advice, because I know it's specific to each company.
On the platform, right? And it depends on the. I think it depends on the audience. I think that if you have an audience already and you're building your own content to engage with them, that's fun. That's great. I think the bit about where you don't have an audience, I think that's much more difficult to do organically these days. Particularly if we're looking specifically at social, you're likely to be getting, zero traction unless you're very, very clever. And so, that could be tapping into, one way to get around that could be tapping into networks within your own business. So, who's connected to who? Can we amplify our content through our employees? And that's obviously a really interesting strategy. But I think if you're kind of trying to break into a crowded target audience that aren't coming into you already, then you're going to have to put some kind of budget behind that to get visibility, just because of the way all these platforms now work. They're designed to be money making machines, and it's very difficult to get to get that kind of free to get that sort of free exposure anymore. 10 years ago it was very different, but we are where we are now.
Yeah, especially on Facebook. If you're going to ever use Facebook for your corporate channel or your own careers channel, you just have to know it's pay to play, because no one's seeing your posts at all. Yeah. But I do think it adds a lot of value if you have some kind of budget, and it's very, very affordable. But of course, only to the right places. I've done well with Singapore with Facebook, but there are certain countries it would do terrible. So I think it's a lot about testing small amounts of money. And you say, okay, this is working. We're getting clicks or replies. Then you can kind of put a bit more into it. But yeah, social media is definitely getting more and more of pay to play. For Twitter, I find the only time it's great organically is for events, because you do have the hashtag for the event. People are checking that hashtag, but then you have to be so careful not to spam it because you're a brand, or you could use your recruiters or however. But that's when I think organically we do well on Twitter. If we're at an event, we're producing value, giving people some kind of value. They do see it, they'll retweet it. That's useful. But Facebook, gotta get out the money.
Absolutely.
So what about video content? So I read a stat by Cisco. They said something along the lines of 85% of online traffic will be video based by 2020. Cool. Do you buy into that or not?
Yeah, I do. I absolutely. I mean, here we are on video online within social platforms as we speak, and where there are people watching, and I can see them having a conversation on the side of the screen, which I keep forgetting to make. So I think definitely, but I think there's some caveats. There's some caveats around that as well, because as video becomes more ubiquitous, two things. So first of all, as it becomes more ubiquitous, how do you stand out? So you only have to turn on LinkedIn on any given day, and there are a series of what I like to call walking down the street giving a pitch video, people sort of selling tech or whatever.
I know exactly what you're thinking of, and I'm going to call it.
When there's one of them in your stream, that's really interesting. When there's 20 of them, then that's not going to stand out. So I think there's a bit about standing out. As anything becomes ubiquitous, you have to work harder to stand out. I also think there's an interesting thing about length. I've seen a few kind of rumblings and research recently that says that, which is ironic considering what we're doing now, that lots of people don't necessarily engage with longer form video, as part of their social channels. They might come back and watch something, on recording when they've got time or all that kind of stuff. But it's a lot of it is about attention. Now I would say this because I run a podcast and I'm a massive fan of audio, but it's actually easier to listen to audio while you're doing something else than it is to watch video. So you can listen to audio while you're walking down the street, or you're going to a meeting, or you're doing washing up. You can't really do that with video. And if we think about how time poor our audiences are, I think it's thinking about how to use video sort of properly within that content, within that context. Are people really going to watch the 10-minute video you just put up on LinkedIn that's going to stream past, and they may never be able to come back to it or bookmark it again? So yeah, I think it's I think video is the future, but again, we have to think really carefully about the best way to make the most out of that.
Seems like live video is really the future more than recorded video, especially on social media, because it's exciting. Like something crazy could happen, right?
Yeah, I think that sense of place is kind of really important. It's all about how do you keep people's interest up. And again, these are all parts. These are all styles of storytelling. You know, and there is that sort of tension in a live video that you don't necessarily know what's going to happen. You know, what's going to happen next. You keep watching in case you know, in case
goes by.
something interesting or someone does. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. But that's down to almost the sort of the tension in the storytelling that. And the sense of really understanding the sense of place. So yeah, I think, you know, definitely.
But the problem is, I feel like companies are still nervous about that, but also wants really highly produced. But that's changing. I'm seeing it. Are you seeing that slowly changing, where they're accepting more of people taking videos of themselves and or employees?
Absolutely. And it comes down to that I keep saying it, but it comes down to how you resonate with storytelling. You know, so your intern making videos that were really popular. It's because there's an essence coming across in that people, you know, that people like, and you can do that in an expensive video. We all go and watch, you know, multi-million-dollar budget films and you know, and kind of get sucked into them. But it comes down to that. You know, creating that resonance, and you know, you don't have to spend a fortune on production to be able to do that. And in fact, you can production and not do that, and you know, your kind of video is going to fail in terms of its impact.
Mm-hmm. And we're seeing more and more video vendors popping out. You know, people that can help you with different aspects of a video and kind of make it easier. So we'll see if that keeps happening.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's all about digitization. It's kind of many millions of years ago, before I worked in recruitment marketing, I used to work in photography, selling, kind of working with ad agencies on photographic rights and things like that. And at the time, being a professional photographer was very, very difficult, because you shot everything on film. You needed thousands of pounds worth of equipment. Because you shot it on film, you needed to be absolutely, you know, brilliant first time out. You couldn't take
Photoshop
pictures on a digital camera and pick one. But obviously, as the technology gets easier, the barriers to entry go down, and we see that with video now. It's you know, and it's the same with audio as well. It's like you know, you can buy professional grade equipment for you know, a relatively you know, small amount of money. You learn how to use that, and you know, kind of help people. So I think that's the other good thing as well. We talk about spending a fortune on professionally produced video, but actually professionally produced video is coming down in price, and hopefully is more accessible to people.
Yeah, good point. Do we have any questions I missed there, Glenn? There's so much going on. I'm not sure what's over there. Oh, I think he's got muted somehow. We can't hear you. That's unusual. I've never seen that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you mute him?
I did my mistake.
Can you do sign language or something? Or
I think I might have, but I don't know how to.
Right.
Can you tell us how to unmute him?
Write something in the corner. I saw some people were asking questions about podcasting, so we could talk about that. He's nodding. if we wanted to.
Yes, great.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know where to kind of don't necessarily know where to start.
Well, I like your first tip before we even started here. We were talking about just consistency. That's so hard, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. If we're sort of talking about audio. You know, it's something that is definitely sort of massively growing in popularity. I see people talking about, you know, talking about podcasts all the time. I'm actually working on some podcast series for various kind of employers at the moment. So I think it's kind of a fascinating format, and it's something that people can do when they're doing. That's
why I like it, because I have a million things going on in my life. Are you back?
Yeah.
I'm back with sound.
Great. Ask us a question.
But I don't have time for these books. It's like impossible with my 50 million things happening. But like you said, a podcast, I can work, or I can be, you know, driving, walking. So I think that's cool.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, again, I think it's another interesting way of kind of getting people's attention in a different mode at a different time, and you know, helping people to kind of, you know, almost multitask and you know, and do something while they're doing something else.
Does that work for you for kind of inbound marketing? Because you're well known for that. Do people then come to you and want consultant work, right?
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's interesting. It's not actually, the reason I started the podcast was because, so I say it's nearly 4 years ago, so it's difficult to remember why and how it started. I started it because I've always done a huge amount of research into what's going on in talent acquisition. So, on top of the consultancy I'm doing, I was always talking to people to find out, what's really going on, how's technology changing, how are things actually working practically. We know what all the vendors are saying about their brilliant technology solutions, but how are people actually finding it? What lessons can we learn from that? So I always did a huge amount of research and a huge amount of interviews, and I started the podcast because I thought, wouldn't it be good just to kind of make my process a bit more public, basically. So I was kind of doing it anyway, and I thought, I'm a real big fan of audio, so I thought I'd just make it into a sort of a podcast format. So people could kind of hear the conversations that I was that I was having, and get an insight into what's happening in sort of talent acquisition around the world, basically. So because I started it like that, I never really had a problem, with consistency and doing it, because I was doing it anyway. And I think if you're actually building a podcast over the long term with an audience, it takes a huge amount of time to actually build an audience in the podcast space. And most podcasts that start never get beyond about 10 episodes. In fact, most podcasts that start never even get to episode 1, because people realise that there's quite a lot of stuff to get involved to do that. So it's kind of that consistency that kind of sees it through. And I was 50 episodes in before I really started caring about the audience. It's just kind of grown from there. So I think that came back to the reason that I started it, which was just to make my process a bit more kind of open and shareable.
And how much time does that take per week, Matt? Because I think both in relation to the sort of content marketing and creation of, and this as a piece of content, most recruiters will argue, I haven't got time for this. When in actual fact, they need to make time. So something like a podcast, when you're thinking about, what you do, how much time do you kind of allocate to that per week, roughly? So
I always massively underestimate this. I always say about 4 hours, and then my wife always tells me that's completely different. I seem to be doing it all the time. It is hours per week. It is hours per week to do it. That said, I'm trying to produce it to a really high standard wise, and also I'm doing it every week. So there is a lot of time and effort to do it. However, it works for me because it does a number of things. As Audra said, it's kind of marketing for me and my business and my thinking. I've used all the podcast, the books, the first book we've written and the second book we've written. You were using a lot of the podcast interviews as case studies. I use the podcast interview content in presentations I do. I use it as as examples in my consulting and things like that. So it's the fact that I'm able to use it for lots of different purposes that kind of make it worthwhile. And I think that's true about content in general.
Yes.
You invest time to do it, but there are so many different ways that you can use the same piece of content.
Yeah. Companies, I feel like could do that better. I know I could do that better sometimes. Like I think of putting it in different places, not everywhere, just slamming it out, but being creative about turning it into a blog, or if you have a video, and different ways we can repurpose content. I think everyone could do a little more of that if it's strategic and smart. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it's that kind of repurposing that people miss out of. I was doing some work, and also not just repurposing, but understanding the content that's already in the business. So, I've done lots of work with clients before, and they said we haven't got any content. It's like,
wait a minute.
Your corporate YouTube channel is full of content. Now, it's not specific content that you've created for this recruitment problem. However, it's content that your company owns that's actually already in the public domain and shareable, and it beautifully illustrates the case that you're trying to make in your recruitment marketing at that point. So why don't you just reuse that? And I think that all types of businesses have some kind of content, even if it's like the internal video that someone filmed at the sales conference, or you know what I mean? So I think that there is so much content sitting within businesses that people don't really think about, because it's not been created specifically for a recruitment purpose, or it's not been created specifically for that campaign. So that's always a big thing for me, to ask employers to actually see what content they've already got.
So do you think some companies look at content creation in isolation? So back to your point and to Audra's point, in as much as they look at them as projects and they almost kind of forget that content and don't actually have, like Audra says, a plan, an actual forecasted plan where they can look at the content they're creating, look and see where they could repurpose it. And actually, I think, Audra, you mentioned almost having sort of like content libraries where people that aren't particularly proficient at creating content can use certain templates that are, signed off by the business, personalized, business specific. They can almost utilize that. So it's almost that point, in as much as companies almost don't think that far ahead in terms of their content creation. So starting with actually a plan is going to be their best starting point, which sounds quite obvious, but a lot of companies just approach it with projects in mind, don't they? Would is that fair to say in your experience? Have you experienced that?
Me or Audra?
Yeah.
Both.
In my experience, yeah. I mean, I think, having that plan, understanding the content, it all comes back to the strategy part of content marketing, which is what we started off, got that strategy. Part of that is to look at what your available assets are, which could be content that you already have, things that you can create. I talked about having this kind of base level of content that's always there on a day-to-day basis about putting things out. You can build on that and say, okay, during the year we're going to have key themes that we're pushing that tie into our recruitment, specific resourcing objectives, and then within that, we've got specific campaigns. We know we need X number of people at this particular time. And then beyond that, it's like, how are we remarketing and repurposing content that we already have to people who have already kind of shown an interest. So I think this is where you really get into the strategic thinking part of thinking part of this. And to do that, you really have to understand what you're trying to achieve. And as you say, have that plan for the year, understand the content you already have. Could we break this up from then? And then actually we're going to create some content in February. We could use that again in September for this, or we could, as you say, make it into a blog, or take the audio out of the video and use that as something different. So I think it's just having that kind of strategic thinking around it is kind of key. And that's not about spending more money or hiring more people to do content. It's just about thinking about it slightly differently.
Yeah, and one thing we didn't even touch, and there's a whole hour if we wanted to touch about employee advocacy. Once you have the content, you can get your employees, if in the right way. Again, I saw some really bad things with that recently. I believe it was at Amazon, where they had the Twitter drones, or people.
They're all saying the same thing. Yeah. If
you do it right and people really want to share it, that's a whole nother. It's even better than your brand sharing this fabulous content. Getting the employees to share it is going to just do even better. The networks are huge. That's a whole other thing. I mean, like I said, that's a whole other show, though, probably.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a really interesting case study interview on employee advocacy coming out on the podcast, hopefully this month. It's recorded. I'm just waiting for someone needs to give their permission to talk about it first, which is the way of things. But that's a fantastic case study on how you can use technology and employee advocacy to really sort of get employer brand messaging out there. So and I think that's a massively growing area. It's an area where technology can certainly help as well, and I know that they're
or hurt.
Well, yeah, exactly, yeah.
These are the ones where they say, okay, tweet this, and you've got 50 or to 100 people tweeting the same thing.
Which again comes down to the thinking, the thinking behind it. It's it's about standing out, it's about resonating, it's about getting people to take action, but it's also, just kind of understanding. What can happen if you use technology to amplify a really terrible or really inauthentic message. I think the thing that you mentioned was all about there'd been some horrendous publicity about what it was like to work in a certain part of this company, and suddenly they unleashed this band of automated identikit tweeters saying it's great to work here.
Awesome.
Ignore the man behind the curtain. It's all.
And meanwhile, they were peeing in bottles because they couldn't take toilet breaks.
Yeah, so it's I think again, it's just thinking it through, and none of this is a magic wand to cure, to cure sort of bad sort of employer brand issues like that.
I have one question while we have time. Aside from my show, which was obviously the very best ever, what was your favorite guest you've ever had? What's the one show, if people haven't in your podcast, that they should just go and listen to?
They're all my favorites. They're all my favorites because when people give
loaded question.
They're all my favorites. I've got loads because, as you say, I think I haven't actually published a show this week, so I've lost count of where we're up to. But I think it's about 163 or something. My favourite one in the last year, which is very, very prescient to what we're talking about now, was I can't remember the exact number of the episode. It would have been over the summer, which was with a guy called Shane Snow, and it was all about storytelling. And he writes for The New Yorker. He's a sort of fairly well-known sort of non-fiction, creative non-fiction writer. He's written some brilliant books about business. Founded a company called Contently, which is all about content marketing. And so he had a book out. I kind of reached out to his PR people, and he agreed to be on the show. You know, his book's nothing to do with recruitment, but it was all about, storytelling and business and all that sort of stuff. So it was a really great interview, and he spent a lot of time really thinking through and tailoring what he was talking about to a talent acquisition audience, which I was supremely grateful for. And was also very unexpected because I didn't think that he would take the time to do that. And a lot of there's so much stuff in there about the structure of a great story, how you can get business messages across in storytelling. And he's a great guy, and his books are great. So that's my favorite interview of the last 12 months.
Fabulous. I'm going to watch that today. Any last questions, Glenn, that I missed? We're coming up with.
Yeah, I mean, if it's kind of relevant, is there a major trend that anybody should look out for in kind of recruitment, sort of recruitment content marketing for 2019? Are you prepared to put back a trend at all, Matt, or a particular? Is that relevant?
I think. If I was talking about recruiting as a whole, I'd be citing automation, because I think that's really interesting in terms of what happens with that. If I was citing a trend that everyone will be talking about but not understanding, I would cite blockchain. And if we're talking about content marketing, I think I would hope, and this is not a prediction, it's a hope, that content marketing strategy would become a trend, that actually people would start, rather than just thinking we need some content, let's just get some, through whatever means we can, or we're going to be really pleased with ourselves because we spent a lot of money on the video and it won an award. Just people really getting the strategic side of content, content out there. And there's so much, it's so much, this happens so much in other aspects of marketing. I think it's really something that we should be looking very, very closely at in recruiting.
It's just a matter of us really catching up with marketing, right? Because they're already there. We're just way back here.
Exactly. And having that strategy, having that strategic framework around it is really the critical part.
Definitely agree.
Cool.
Awesome. This has absolutely flown by. Thank you so much, Matt and Glenn. I'm going to watch this again myself because I feel like there were some nuggets of things that I need to pick out. So next week we have Maury Hannigan. We're going to talk about video. So obviously really relevant topic. She's going to tell us why we should stop wasting money on videos. And I definitely can see some aspects. So we'll see what she says. Awesome. Thank you again, Matt. This was fantastic. I really, really appreciate it.
No, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on the show, and Happy New Year to everyone.
Yep. You too. Thank you again, Glenn. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Take care. Bye.